This is Shalom World Podcast.
Welcome to Voyage. This is a podcast where we take you to the world of the Apocalypse of John. This is the book of Revelation. I am your host, Frances Hogan. Welcome to our reflections on the book of Revelation. We are now going to go into the second half of the book of Revelation, which is full of drama. And it is the one part of the Bible where there are so many controversies about that no matter what you say, it's going to be contested. So I understand that. So let's read a couple of verses, first of all, and then I'll begin to make a commentary. John says, "Now there was a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman adorned with the sun, standing on the moon, and with the 12 stars on her head for a crown. She was pregnant and she was in labor, crying aloud in the pangs of childbirth. And then a second sign appeared in the sky, a huge red dragon, which had 7 heads and 10 horns, and each of the 7 heads crowned with a coronet. Its tail dragged a third of the stars from the sky and dropped them to the earth. And the dragon stopped in front of the woman as she was having the child, so that he could eat it as soon as it was born from the mother. The woman brought a male child into the world, the son who was to rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And the child was taken straight up to God and his throne. And the woman escaped into the desert, where God had made a place of safety ready for her for 1260 days. Here we begin the very dramatic second part of the book of Revelation. And all of a sudden in chapter 12, John breaks off from speaking about the 3 waves of the tribulation in the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. And it seems as if he's lost the plot, but he's a most clever writer, a most wonderful, dramatic writer, and he knows exactly what he's doing. He wants to give us a picture of the whole drama of the battle between Satan and God and the human race and God before we go into the final stages, so that we will understand the logic of what actually God is doing. So John takes us right back to the beginning, and he shows us the eternal battle between Lucifer and God. And it all starts there, back there. And he wants us to see the fall of Lucifer. He wants us to see the victory of Jesus on Calvary, so that no matter what happens to the woman, of course you're saying, who is the woman? Hold tight, I'll tell you who she is. Don't presume you know, because it depends on what church you belong to as to the conclusion you jump to as to who the woman is. So we see the fall of Lucifer. And so Christians already know that Satan has opposed Christ from the very beginning, literally as soon as he was born. For example, you had Herod wanting to kill him in his infancy. You had his exile into Egypt in his infancy. He was opposed absolutely during his ministry. The leadership of Israel turned against him in his ministry, and they actually orchestrated his martyrdom. So he has had opposition from the very beginning. So John wants the church, the woman church, you'll hear me talking about that, to understand she is the body of that head. The whole Christ consists of Christ and his members. He is the vine, we are the branches. There has to be similarity between the two. So if that was the pattern of Satan opposing the Christ himself, it's the pattern of Satan opposing his body as well. It's just plain logic. So Christians have to understand that this is so. Right from the very beginning, when the church was born, the Jewish leadership persecuted the church in its infancy. You find that in the Acts of the Apostles. And then once the church moved into the Roman Empire, she was opposed by Satan and by the beast that we're going to meet with in chapter 13. The beast is the Roman Empire at that time. But she was also opposed by the synagogue everywhere she went in Asia Minor, for example, because we have that in the Acts of the Apostles and we have it in the letters. And John calls the synagogue that actually persecuted the church not because they were satanic, but because Satan is the spirit behind all opposition to God's people. Whether you're talking about the Old Testament or the New Testament, the same thing. He is the instigator and he is the spirit behind all persecution. But John wants the Christians to know that Satan is a defeated foe. He's like a a wounded, dying, ferocious animal who wants to do more damage in his dying than he did during his life. We're going to be told that he comes down to the earth in a rage because he wants to take revenge on Jesus. And once we begin to understand the logic of what John is saying, the text is going to make an awful lot more sense to us. Okay, so believe it or not, John wants the church to take heart, to take courage. And he wants to say, look, if you know what's going on, you are empowered to deal with it. Knowledge is power. And this is what the Lord has done from the beginning. The prophet Amos, chapter 3, verse 7 says, the Lord never does anything without telling his prophets first. And this is so to this very day, that the Lord has been continuously revealing to us through the prophets and the mystics and the saints and the seers. And there are so many of them in the world today, it's absolutely amazing. He continues to tell us exactly what is happening and what's going to happen so that we are sure and we can be ready. And the thing that John wants us to realize is that the final outcome is sure. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Jesus said that in Matthew 16:18. It won't prevail, but it sure will try. Jesus has already won the battle. And we get this immediately here in chapter 12. Jesus has already begun his reign on the earth. We're going to hear that in a few minutes. But we've seen it in chapter 5 when Jesus took the scroll from God the Father and he is in control of what is happening. And he wants to clean up the earth before he returns. He's in control. He has taken up his reign. And all of this tribulation is him cleaning up the mess. Why? Because Hebrews 12:14 tells us that nothing unholy or unworthy can enter the presence of God. That's the warning for you and me. Only what is holy can enter the presence of God. There will come a day when there is a particular air flight you will take, and the only baggage allowance is love, because you're going to the kingdom of love. If you don't have the baggage allowance of love, you're in grave danger. You will be like the unwise virgins who had no oil in their lamps. And so when the bridegroom came, they were not ready. They couldn't go into the banquet. So there's warning here for all of us. And the warning is to be ready now, because that flight could take off anytime. So the next thing that John wants to get across to us, the logic. Okay, Jesus has won the victory. He's reigning in heaven. He has started his reign on earth and all the rest of it. But he paid for it with his life. He paid a very high price for his victory. And if the church is going to become worthy of him so that she can be the bride of the Lamb and that she can go into the wedding of the Lamb in chapter 19, then she too has to learn the logic of self-sacrifice. She has got to learn the logic that she too must lay down her life. There is a prophecy in John 21, which most people don't see and won't acknowledge as a prophecy, but it is in fact a prophecy. That is in the last chapter of John's Gospel. We meet Peter and John, and both of them represent the future in the context of that text. Peter represents the whole Petrine ministry, and John represents the whole body of believers. And Peter was told straight up by Jesus, when you were young, you put your own belt around you and you went wherever you wanted to. But when you are old, somebody else will put a belt around you and take you to where you would rather not go. And John says he was prophesying Peter's martyrdom. Now, everybody takes it that that is just personal to Peter. That is not so. Peter represents the whole Petrine ministry. And it is the Catholic Church, represented by Peter, that will lay down its life for its master. In spite of all the odds, in spite of everything that everybody says about it, it will lay down its life for its master. And the body of believers will go on. It's absolutely amazing, because there's going to be new heavens and a new earth. And heaven for John is the church and earth is the world. There's going to be new heavens and new earth. We're going to have that in chapters 21 and 22. So we're starting a very dramatic phase. And what John gives us between chapters 12 and chapter 14 are 7 signs. Now, 7 is John's favourite number. We saw that the 7 signs are terribly important. We've already given you the 7 Beatitudes in the book of Revelation. Now I want to give you the 7 signs. And if you realise there are 7 signs, John is painting a picture for you. And if you're good at jigsaw puzzles, you'll know that every part of the picture is required in order to get the full vision. And so the first of these visions is the woman clothed with the sun. That's 12 verses 1 to 2. The second one is the huge red dragon. That's chapter 12 verses 3 to 17. The third one is the beast from the sea, chapter 13 verses 1 to 10. The fourth one is the second beast from the land. That is chapter 13 verses 11 to 18. The fifth one is the Lamb and his companions on Zion. That's chapter 14 verses 1 to 5. The sixth one is the three angels announcing judgment in chapter 14 verses 6 to 13. And the final one is the harvest of the earth. In other words, these 7 signs go straight through to the end. And if you look at each sign separately and then add them all together, it actually begins to make sense. So let's look at the first one. The first great sign is a woman adorned with the sun, standing on the moon and with 12 stars for her crown. And if you happen to be Catholic, you'll immediately say, oh, that's our Blessed Mother. If you happen to belong to other churches, you will say, oh, that's Israel. And both of you are right, and both of you are wrong as well. Wrong in the sense that the picture is not full enough. So let's have a look and see, because this is a composite picture, and it is telling us a lot of the Bible. And it is also introducing us to another woman. The strange thing is that the second half of John's Gospel is dominated by 2 women. One is the glorious woman in chapter 12, and the other is the terrible, gaudy harlot in chapter 17. Isn't there a message? I'll give it to you. It's terribly important, but I'll wait until I explain the glorious woman first. So, number 1, the glorious woman is Eve. Now, none of the scholars will agree with me. I'll tell you why. She didn't have 12 stars in her crown. But she was created in grace, therefore created in glory. Because of the grace that she had, she was clothed in heavenly perfection. She was attacked by the dragon. Unfortunately, the dragon prevailed. And because of she lost the battle with the dragon, she brought sickness, sin, death, and hell into the world. In other words, dragged the human race with her down to hell. Now do you see why I started with Eve? Because that's the introduction to the harlot. So, even though she was the mother of all the living, she brought chaos into the world for a very simple reason that I want to make very clear to you, because it explains everything in the Bible. She opposed her human will to the divine. Only the divine will can prevail if you want heaven on earth. The human will brings chaos and allows Satan to enter in and bring hell on earth. The human will has got to surrender to the divine. It's actually that simple. And if you want to be on the right side of the Lord in his return, surrender your will to the divine. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven is how people are going to live in chapters 21 and 22. But those who continue to oppose their will to the divine will, they're not even going to be in chapters 21 and 22. Wherever they will be, they won't be there. So this is the issue, and that's why I started with Eve. The second level of understanding of this woman is what I call Old Israel. And I have to explain to all of you who may be sensitive to that kind of language that I am not under any sense denigrating Israel at all. By the time we get to chapter 17, I'll be talking about the old church. Human nature is the same in both. So, Old Israel, that is the Israel at the time of the covenant of Moses, okay, up to the time of its judgment in AD 70. She was the wife of the Lord. She had entered into covenant with God. She had 12 patriarchs. They're the 12 stars in her crown. She was privileged with having God's covenant and God's word, and that was her heavenly perfection. But if God calls a person, he always gives them a mission. And her mission, her duty, was to bring God's salvation to the earth. God's salvation is to bring God's kingdom to the earth. And she was meant to be the model and the first of all the kingdoms. What I mean by that is all the kingdoms that would surrender to the Lord and let him reign upon the earth. This was her struggle. She was opposed by her own weaknesses and by her own sinfulness. You'll see where I'm going with this in a minute. She had terrible struggles with idolatry and immorality throughout the centuries. And the prophet Isaiah, chapter 26, verses 16 to 19, confessed, and this is in the 8th century before Christ, that she had failed in this mission. But even though she didn't bring God's salvation to the earth as was planned, she did give us God's holy word in the scriptures. She did bring forth the Messiah, who is God's salvation. His name is salvation. And the reason why she gave birth to the Messiah is because God gifted her with the most perfect woman who ever lived, Mary of Nazareth. So the Catholics are right and the Protestants are right, so long as you complete the picture. So this woman, therefore, that we're looking at in Revelation 12, represents the new Israel. In other words, the new people of God that began with the Messiah, because the old people of God had absolutely renounced him. We have no king but Caesar. That was the most terrifying moment in their entire history, because they rejected God. They rejected their covenant. They rejected their mission. They rejected everything. And it was the woman sitting on the beast, because the beast was Rome. But you'll have much more of that much later. The new Israel, or the new people of God, and I will call her, so that your sensitivities aren't walked on all the time, I'll call her woman church. She was clothed with heavenly perfection and abundance of grace because redemption had come to the human race. She was gifted with God's holy word through old Israel and through the Messiah. She was gifted with the mother of the Messiah, who was given to her as the mother of the church in John 19, verses 25 to 27, when she became the mother of all believers at the foot of the cross in torture. You'll hear more about that as well. And her glory is that she has Emmanuel, God with us, in the Holy Eucharist. She's founded on 12 patriarchs. That's the 12 apostles who are the stars in her crown. And she too has to struggle to try and bring forth the kingdom of God upon the earth. She too has to struggle against her own weaknesses and her own sinfulness. And she has to struggle against heresy and idolatry and immorality. And she will only bring forth Christ in torture, that is, under dreadful persecution. I'll talk to you more about that next time. Thank you for listening. Slán agus beannacht dé libh. Goodbye. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's session. Share your feedback with us at podcast@shalomworld.org. You can motivate and support us today. shalomworld.org/donate. Visit shalomworld.org for more information about Shalom World podcasts. To get the latest updates, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Shalom World Podcasts. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and others.